Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of Know the Faith, Defend the Faith. My name is William Hemsworth, and thank you so much for joining me. Know the Faith, Defend the Faith is a production of the Tucson Institute of Catholic Apologetics here in Tucson, Arizona. And for those of you watching on YouTube, it's the same YouTube feed as the Bible Catholic, so you're in the right place. You're still going to get this content. With it being the first show, I want to touch on foundation. We need the foundation. Who's God? Can God be proved? Specifically, we are going to answer our atheist friends. Now, is this a be-all, end-all? No, but it's going to give you some tools. It's going to give you some arguments. It's going to give you some proofs. And at the end, I'm going to give you some resources that I think will be very helpful for you to study up on more. But first, we have to know what atheism is. Atheism, if you haven't heard, has grown exponentially in our country, and even in our world. It's a belief that says that there's no God. In fact, atheism literally means without God. It comes from two Greek words that mean without God. Now, atheism has had this kind of like a resurgence in recent years. In fact, they're even advertising to gain adherence to their belief, which is really strange. To advertise to get something to believe in something that doesn't exist. It's like the ultimate oxymoron to me. And here in Tucson, there was actually a billboard down off of, for those of you in Tucson, off of Alvernon and Ajo from the Freedom from Religion Foundation that actually advertised to join atheism, believe as we do. I mean, just weird stuff. I mean, the Freedom from Religion Foundation is spending millions of dollars in advertising to convince the public that something does not exist. In the past, atheists respected the beliefs of Christians and other religions. Some still do, but it seems to be a bygone era, though, because, there's like these four horsemen, if you will, of what they call new atheists. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Denner. A couple of them have passed away. God rest their soul. They've assumed the leadership of growing this movement, and they're releasing book after book, DVD after DVD into our society to basically, in their attempt, prove that there is no God. And so the major worldview of atheists, in particular secular humanists, is that human reason is the pinnacle of all thought and morals. It's a belief that says that we're the highest form of life on earth and we evolved from other species. And since there is no God, the goal of life is to be happy and productive in the world. Now, just to be clear, the Catholic Church kind of makes room for evolution, but as long as it's believed that God was in control each step of the way. It wasn't like atheists believe where, it was all by pure chance. God was in control. And so since the meaning of life in atheism is self-determined, it can vary greatly from person to person. Morals also vary among each person and are determined by reason and one's cultural norms. Absolute morals do not exist because they may vary widely among individuals. But norms such as stealing, murder, rape, and child molestation, at least to a majority of atheists, are still they're considered evil. In the atheistic worldview, everyone is seen as good, and there's no reason to have a God who says everyone is a sinner. There's evil in the world because we fail to look after each other. And these objections, we'll categorize them into following three questions. The first one, why is there evil in the world? So the problem of evil. The second question, from where do we derive our morals, and are there moral absolutes? And then lastly, does God exist? And so the intent of this podcast or YouTube video is to provide a summary, kind of a review of the atheistic worldview. And the questions that we just went over are often presented by atheists And we'll answer them from a Christian perspective. Now, to be totally honest, there's probably people out there that can answer it better than I do, than I can, but we're going to take a stab at it. All right? So hang with me. So when it comes to discussing the faith with atheists, it's important to do so in love. Love is the ultimate apologetic. Too often, Christians break down and say that anyone who is an atheist is stupid, or something to that effect. It's not the way to go. As the old saying goes, we can catch more bees with honey instead of vinegar. And Proverbs 15:1 states, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." So why is there evil in the world? When atheists express their disapproval of theism, one of two things are normally brought up. They may say things like, "There's no God because there is no evidence to support his existence," or "There is no God because a good God will not allow evil things to happen." And so, this section, we're going to deal with this problem of evil, and we'll deal with evidence for God just a little bit later. Now, to deny that evil exists would to make a mockery of our God-given intellect and ability to reason. All we have to do is turn on the evening news to see this play out in almost every segment of the broadcast. Not even the news. You can go to Facebook and catch the latest feed. It's there. There's bad stuff happening all the time. So one wants to know if religion has belief in God who does evil or fails to do good. That was a quote by J.S. Feinberg. The argument states that if God is a good God, why are there wars, disease, other things like that? From a Christian perspective, there are right ways and wrong ways to answer this question. A bad answer is to say the very popular phrase that God works in mysterious ways. Now, there's a lot of truth in that statement. It is true. He's above our finite minds. But we have to remember that we're talking with someone who does not have a belief in the existence of God. Now, in his book, Answering Atheism, Trent Horn states, quote, "No serious theist believes that God desires the suffering of people on earth just so he can watch them suffer. Rather, God uses the suffering in our lives because he desires the greater good that can come from such suffering." Another way to approach the subject is to ask what evil is. Evil can be distinguished into two parts. There is a moral evil, which is someone reacting against what is good. Then there is a natural evil, which is when bad effects flow from a morally good or non-moral cause. So moral evil is anything that is against God. That would include acts such as murder, rape, torture, cheating, stealing, or even lying. Natural evil is caused by the choices of people. So the question must be asked to the atheist: which evil should we get rid of? Because we can't pick and choose which evil should stay. If God were to eliminate all evil in the world, then the human race would cease to exist. Moral and natural evils cannot be attributed to God because he simply didn't create them. The choices we make have a type of ripple effect that we may not be able to comprehend at the time of the act. In fact, the final effect may not be apparent for centuries even. For human beings are made in God's image, which includes the possession of free will. However, if God's creation chose to do evil, is he responsible for it? Human beings are not robots that God built with a predetermined program. Everything that the person did was done of his own free will and accord. If we did not have free will, then good things that are done would have no meaning. The charity displayed to the less fortunate, teaching, being a loving parent, or just being nice will be the norm and nothing special. Yes, there is evil in the world, and we must do our best to make it less and less. However, there is much more good in the world than evil. And that is a credit to the Creator, to God. St. Augustine put it best when he wrote, quote, "For a runaway horse is better than a stone that stays in the right place, only because it has no movement or perception of its own. And in the same way, a creature that sins by free will is more excellent than one that does not sin only because it has no free will. So where do we derive our morals? One of the biggest mistakes that we can make when discussing morality with an atheist is assuming that since atheists do not believe in God, that therefore they have no morals. I see that a lot online, and it's a mistake. One can be an atheist, but yet still have a high moral character. But the question is, where did that moral character come from? See, in the atheistic worldview, morals derive from wanting to help humanity instead of a motivation for heaven in the next life. Or that's what atheists would have you believe. Popular atheists claim that goodness is embedded in all of us, and a lack of morality is caused by being selfish. And there's some truth to that. The claim is that our conscience is the barrier that keeps us from breaking regular moral norms. However, there are many among us that do not have the same moral standard. For some, it may be okay to rape. For some, it may be okay to steal. But the thing is that morality, is not subjective. To claim that morality is subjective is to make an absolute statement which debunks itself. The Christian would say that the conscience is a supernatural regulator of moral behavior. Pope John Paul II wrote, quote, St. Bonaventure said that conscience was like a herald who blew a loud trumpet to announce the king was coming. So basically, in his word, a finite being who is a product of chance is unable to be the source of morality. This is shown by the different standards of moral conduct present in today's world. When we compare these individual morality codes, it becomes very evident that the individual cannot be the cause. The Christian answer is that God has established a moral compass in all of us. This is why we're able to make a determination between right and wrong, even if we didn't have the best parents. His moral standard is contained in Scripture and sacred tradition and teaching of the church for us to study and learn from. There's no denying that there are moral people who are not Christians. However, the Christian worldview does not state that one must be a Christian to be moral. The Catholic Church would say quite different. That there's truth in all of us, but the fullness of the truth is in the Catholic Church. The moral code comes from something higher than ourselves, and that is God. So next question though, does God exist? The atheistic arguments against God's existence can be classified into two groups. Those two groups are what they call priori arguments and posteriori arguments. Crazy words, I know, sorry. A priori arguments for atheism claim that there is some logical contradiction in the theistic conception of God, and so that it's impossible for such a being to exist. A posteriori argument for atheism claim that the world is other than it would be if God existed, and so conclude from it that there cannot be a God. Posteriori arguments include such things such as the problem of evil, which we dealt with a few minutes ago. So atheists commonly put forth a series of philosophical questions that, at least in their mind, disprove the existence of God. One of the most popular is that of the paradox of the stone. At its core, the reasoning in this question creates a straw man argument. It really does. The argument is the following. It says, can God create a stone so heavy that he can't lift it? Either he can or he can't. If he can't, so the argument goes, then there is something which he can't do, namely create that stone, and therefore he's not omnipotent. If he can, it continues, then there is also something that he cannot do, namely lift the stone, and therefore he's not omnipotent. Either way, then, God is not omnipotent. A being that is not omnipotent is not God, and therefore does not exist. For this to be true, the argument would have to prove that there is sufficient reason for something to exist. This statement assumes that once the impossible is eliminated, in this case God, we just cannot say that there is no explanation at all. The process of elimination forces us to accept even an unlikely explanation because everything that exists has an explanation. And so, that sufficient explanation is that God exists. Now, to clarify the argument for sufficient reason does not say that everything must be proved by the existence of something else. This would result in an endless circle of reasoning. One of the premises of the argument is that something exists in itself or outside of itself. In the case of God, he's outside of space and time, and so our cognitive minds are not able to wrap our minds around that. An analogy of stones around a campfire, maybe that'll be helpful. So let's kind of get into that. The analogy of stones around a campfire. So one may ask why those stones are warm. And of course they're warm because of the fire. But why is the fire warm? The answer is because that is the nature of fire, and if it wasn't warm, there'd be no fire. You see, the paradox of the stone, though it's really entertaining, does not hold up to deductive and sufficient reasoning, and this must be denied as a plausible argument. Another favorite argument is what atheists call the ever-increasing diminishment of God. God does not exist because deities have been replaced by new ones throughout history. God is diminishing in popularity, therefore he must not exist, and soon a new deity will emerge. This is what atheists call the God of the gaps. Whatever gap there is in our understanding of the world, that's what God is supposedly responsible for. Wherever the empty spaces are in our coloring book, that's what gets filled in with the crayon, which some people call God. That's the atheist argument. Now, to be honest, the God of the gaps theory gets presented as a way to cover our own ignorance of the natural world. The worldview of atheists is to look at the natural world and look for various reasons why things are the way they are. They look for answers that favor naturalism, even though divine intervention may be a much better explanation. From an apologetic standpoint, the Christian would be wise to have a basic knowledge of the natural world. That's why natural theology is so important. The origins of the universe is a good example to start with. In the atheist worldview, the universe came from nothing. By chance. In this view, God differs little from nothing, so nothing still could have created the universe. However, this directly contradicts a few basic laws of physics which state that something is unable to come from nothing. If nothing created the universe, then it came from something that is indistinguishable from nothing at all. Did you catch that? The Christian worldview has this answer. And it's the logical conclusion to the question of origin. If one looks at the evidence objectively and without any preconceived notions, it is acceptable and reasonable to conclude that it is God who is the origin of everything. Guys, here's the bottom line. 1 Peter 3:15 states, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." It's very easy to get frustrated when a passionate atheist is asking questions and not satisfied with our responses. Or worse yet, when they're just trolling your Twitter feed, which happens to me, seems like every day this week. But we got to respond with love. Many of us were seeking for truth before we found the truth of Catholicism. And for many in the atheist movement, this is the case. They're just searching for truth. They're wondering. They're searching. Many of us were there. Maybe not as atheists, but maybe we were Protestants searching for truth, and we found our way to the Catholic Church. Let's remember that maybe they're searching, they're asking questions, and our responses, our willingness to provide an answer, even if it's sometimes I don't know, I'm going to get back to you, can plant that seed for them to get closer to truth. The Christian worldview has an answer for atheism. There is an answer. Are we willing to put the work in to learn that answer? There are many arguments that we didn't touch on. We briefly touched on a couple of them, but there's so much more. But I recommend, learning the ontological argument by St. Thomas Aquinas, the proofs of the resurrection, three great works. Trent Horn's book, Answering Atheism, is simply phenomenal. Simply phenomenal. A few years ago, Scott Hahn, I forget the other gentleman's name, wrote a book titled The New Atheism. And of course, St. Pope John Paul II wrote an awesome encyclical called Veritatis Splendor. Those are 3 awesome resources to answer this question on atheism and the atheist worldview. Guys, I thank you so much for joining me on this very first episode of Know the Faith, Defend the Faith. Please visit my website, the Institute's website, at TucsonApologetics.org. Thank you so much for joining me. Please share this episode. Share it. Let's get the word out. Let's answer atheism. God bless you all. Have a fantastic day.